Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of my interview series. Today, I have Patrick Rosevear, an intellectual property lawyer who is an expert in counterfeit goods. He's worked in China helping brands solve counterfeit headaches for many years. So I'm very excited to have Patrick here today. Thank you for joining me, Patrick.
Hey, Ali, great to be here.
So I guess, where do we start? Let's start with, how did you come to be living in China, uncovering brand counterfeit issues?
Yeah, well, it's been a fairly long journey. So I graduated from law school back in 2012 and was admitted to the bar in New Zealand, where I'm originally from. And I did a legal internship in Melbourne in Australia. And at some point, I realized that I needed to go further afield. I went to a house party in Melbourne when there were about 30 to 35 people from my high school at the house party. And I decided that Melbourne was possibly a little bit too close to home and I needed to get a little bit more outside my comfort zone. And just opportunistically around that time, I had a little side project going on doing some manufacturing, just something I've been doing since university, actually. And I went over to China to meet the manufacturers that I was working with. We came over to Shanghai and really fell in love with the place, realized it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. It wasn't like North Korea. It was, really, really fun and open and lots of opportunity. And I decided to move over. I had a strong interest in learning Chinese at the time as well. So I moved over and did that. And then I worked for a New Zealand law firm for some time, and also worked for the New Zealand Embassy. And now I do my own projects. So now I'm just helping companies to protect their intellectual property here in China. But I've had several years of doing this in various different roles.
Yeah, it's such an important activity. From my background working in big companies, working at Chanel, there's always, a team working on counterfeit, Burberry, L'Oreal, it touches so many different brands. But I think that what's interesting is that it's not always just those biggest brands, right? There are smaller brands that get counterfeited as well. And I guess that's why we're here today, to talk about how important it is for brands to think about this, whether they're in China or not. Actually, I think it's something that brands, even if they're selling outside China, we've touched on this when we've had previous conversations, that this counterfeit can go anywhere, right? It's not just being sold in China.
That's right. That's correct. So obviously counterfeit products pop up all over the world. Generally speaking, they are made in China for the most part. They can be made in other countries too, obviously, but China is one of the hotspots for manufacturing both counterfeit and genuine products. So it's not usually the root of the problem. So it's very important to address here in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess then, is there a size and type of brand that's more likely to run into counterfeit issues?
Obviously, the more popular your brand is in China, the more likely it is to be counterfeited, because the room for profit it's much greater because it's a recognizable brand. People are searching for it every day, etc. However, certainly in the last few years, there's definitely been a trend of more boutique brands being copied. So I think when China was just developing, people were really into the Burberrys, the Chanels, the Gucci's of this world, and now people are making the Chinese consumers making a big effort to try and find something else, to find something that's maybe better or more suited to their own personality, or something that they think is just a higher quality product. And they take pride in finding more boutique-y sort of they call it xiaozhong so boutique brands here in China. So there are lots of articles on Xiaohongshu, Little Red Book. Or on various blogging websites, etc. And people sort of talk about this. And when people travel overseas to places like Australia, the UK, to France, for example, they will make a big effort to go out of their way to try and find these more boutique brands. To answer your question, absolutely, there's no sort of typical size brand. You definitely need to have had some exposure to the Chinese market, but I've seen lots of smaller brands being copied every day when I'm doing research for clients. Tiny brands that have just started up in the last couple of years who would have no idea they're being copied yet.
Yeah, it's interesting because it actually makes me think about another issue that brands run into a lot, which is obviously trademarks. And so many brands who have haven't even thought about China yet. You know, they have their trademarks being filed in China, and therefore when they actually 5 years late down the track, when they're actually looking at China, they realize that someone's had their trademark in China for quite some time. So that's another issue that brands have to think about too.
That's correct. Yeah. So there's obviously no way of actually enforcing your intellectual property if you do not own it. So it's very important to first and foremost own your intellectual property in China. So it's a very, very common problem for brands to run into for like a squatter issue, or maybe a distributor with bad intentions who has registered a trademark against the will of the brand owners. So yeah, when I worked at the New Zealand Embassy in the trade team there, we were giving support to New Zealand companies, and we came across this almost weekly, where a company would say, "Hey, we've been looking into China, we've been doing a bit of business there even, and we just realized someone else owns our trademark." So the very, very common issue. However, and generally speaking, Chinese intellectual property law works a little bit differently to common law countries. So you can have like a sort of a common law registration in other countries where if you've been using that trademark, if you've been actually using it, then you can have some sort of like prima facie rights over that trademark. However, in China, it's the first person to register it.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different. However, so it sounds quite gloomy. It sounds like if someone's registered it, then you're done. That's not the case. So within the first 3 years of the registration, you can file a cancellation request based on various factors, but the typical one will be on a bad faith registration.
Yeah.
So that could be squatter activities. So if someone's registered 300 trademarks, for example, that's evidence or prima facie evidence that your trademark was registered with bad faith, with no intention of actually using it, simply as a squatter. Or if that person was a distributor for you, for example, then you can show some evidence of that, and you can cancel the trademark within the first 3 years of the registration. If it's past the first 3 years, then you can cancel that trademark based on non-use. So you just need to sort of file an application to the trademark office in China, showing that the trademark hasn't been used, which is often the case for squatters, and you can get that back. Some people will just try and cut to the chase and purchase the trademark back off the squatters. I don't think that's something that anyone wants to do. But it's an option for some people to do also.
Yeah, totally. It depends on how much appetite you have for fighting it, and how much money they're asking for. I think it's a case by case basis. But so I guess back to the counterfeit stuff. Can you tell me a little bit about how these operations work for beauty in particular, I guess?
Sure. So I work with a lot of fashion brands. So that's been the majority of my experience, but I do also have some exposure to some beauty brands as well. And they work actually quite differently to one another. So I think, for example, if we take the fashion brands, for example, there are a lot of consumers who know that a product might be counterfeit, and they want that product despite the fact that it's a counterfeit product. So they want to have a cheaper Gucci bag, for example. They want to pay 300 Chinese yuan versus 10,000, whatever it is for the genuine product. They like the design, and they really don't care. And some of them will even openly tell their friends that they bought something fake. They don't care about that. However, beauty products are totally the opposite. So consumers are looking for imported beauty products are definitely looking for the real thing, because they're putting it on their skin. There are some, supplements, etc. It's the same deal. So health products too, something that you're consuming into your body. You obviously want it to be the real thing, so it's safe. So it's quite different. So if you look into fake counterfeit fashion products, you see very low price points on both online and offline, because people are, people know what they're buying. They know that it's a low price, it's fake, but whatever, it's not going to kill you, whereas beauty products, it's less obvious that something is fake. So you need to dig deeper, because you don't have the information just based on the price, because the price will often be similar to the real thing, or not significantly lower to the extent where it's definitely fake. So it's fashion products, or fashion brands that have been counterfeited will often be 90% less than, or 95% less than the genuine thing. Whereas beauty products, it might be the same, or just sort of 20 to 50% less, which could be genuine, because beauty products are discounts, etc., and wholesale rates are sometimes, can be around that level. So it's hard to know. So for these things, you really need to test. So you need to do test purchases with online and offline, and usually you can tell by the packaging. So you don't need to open something up. So as soon as for example, I just did a test purchase the other day, and for a very famous Australian cosmetics brand that I won't mention the name of the brand. However, the back of it looked pretty flawless. Like the packaging was really beautiful. It was almost exactly like the real thing. However, there was one spelling mistake on the label, because they have to rewrite this stuff out, and they're not native English speakers, and they spelt New York as New York with an E instead of an O. So that was the giveaway in that case. There was some small differences with the packaging as well, which you could notice. And obviously, if you opened it up and tested the actual product, you would probably be able to know if you're comparing it to the real thing, if you're familiar with the real product. But yeah, it's certainly harder to. You have to take one or two more steps to find out if something is real or not.
Yeah, totally. And I think I shared this story with you before, but I remember years ago working at Chanel, we found a whole faked counter in Hainan. Like the whole counter, all the products, everything was completely fake. And I think everyone was completely shocked. Hainan was not what it is today. It's not a destination where everyone went all the time. It was definitely somewhere that I think the first visit from the head office team ever. So yeah, it's amazing the quality of the look and feel. But as you said, the actual product inside, of course, they don't have a fighting chance, and they don't care that it's really like the actual thing. I mean, I think fragrance is a category that is very susceptible to this. But I don't know whether makeup and skincare gets counterfeited as much as fragrance does. But certainly I know that fragrance gets counterfeited a lot.
Yeah, no, and fragrance is a bad one. Skincare products, absolutely. There's a huge amount of counterfeit stuff out there. So it is harder to find out. As I mentioned before, it's harder to find based on price. However, I've uncovered troves of this stuff for beauty products. I've been anonymously talking to a couple of wholesalers who sell drop ship. They drop ship these beauty products. So, for example, they might sell a famous Western makeup brand that might potentially sell for $100 retail for the genuine product, and they'll sell it for about $3 or $5 US, and then they will drop ship it to your client. So it's within China, and so you can have a service where I might have on my Facebook wall of WeChats and my WeChat moments, I might have a bunch of products every day, and I sell directly to my consumers who think they're buying the real thing, and then I can arrange drop shipping from these wholesalers where they can just send individual packages out. They can also make it look as if the packages are all coming from mainland China, but they can all make it look as if they're coming from Hong Kong and they're genuine Daigou. So, genuine products that have been bought from a pharmacy outside of mainland China. They provide the full logistics tracking that it makes it look like it's coming from Hong Kong when it's not. I assume they can do this in other countries too. And they provide a receipt from a pharmacy, a fake receipt, to show that the product was bought at the real purchase price from a genuine retailer. So they can do it all to make everything look, correct, and it's not. So it's pretty scary. So the consumers will have no idea, and the profit margins are obviously huge. So they can buy it for significantly less than the real product. So not only is it dangerous to the brand's reputation, because someone gets like a skin rash or some serious skin problem, and they post something on social media or they report it to the authorities, and it's really bad news for the brand, because people won't know that it's a fake product and they'll blame the brand. But also it creates huge price competition and takes away market share from the genuine brand as well. So it hurts their business. Yeah.
No, there are a lot of reasons to get it under control, for sure. So if you are looking at helping a brand to uncover these issues, what's the sort of way that you do that, Hannah? And then how do you go to sort of solve it?
So typically, I think that the offline stuff is a different thing in itself. So offline counterfeiting is more difficult to find.
Yeah.
So you can go around trying to find that stuff, but that's sort of harder to sweep up. But luckily now with online, it's actually a lot easier for us to investigate and find this. So what I would typically do is I'll go into all the different popular Chinese platforms. Potentially, if we're looking at different product types, I'd use some different platforms versus others. So I'd look at the wholesale platforms and the retail platforms. I would look, obviously search the brand name in Chinese and English, or sometimes they have some sort of hybrid nicknames that the consumers actually just make up themselves that the brand doesn't know about. So just investigate that. I would obviously get familiar with the brand itself and their price points. So I would know what was looking like it was fake based on price. And then I'd look into, the most, you can see the sales volumes through these platforms.
Yeah.
And so, I was investigating a very famous clothing brand just earlier today. And it's an outdoor clothing brand. I won't mention the name, but they have, genuinely have about, tens of millions of US dollars of sales of counterfeit stuff every month. So they're hugely popular, and they just have stuff going wild. They don't have it under control. So you just look into the most the product links online with the highest sales volumes, because they're doing the most damage to the brand, and they're doing the best job of the sale. So I look into them. I look into potentially the pictures that consumers have uploaded to the platform, and they're giving reviews. There's some telltale signs around, for example, packaging for skincare stuff, looking at the spelling of on the packaging and looking at the sort of the color and everything and the labels. For fashion stuff, it's the same. So often the packaging of a product is done differently because the counterfeiters cut corners. So they get something that's Chabador, so it's pretty much the same, but it's not the same. So they cut corners with labels, with the outside packaging, with often the branding on the product itself. They don't have it exactly the same. So those are the telltale signs I look for, and obviously price is the big red flag for me.
Yeah, of course. And then if you uncover this for a brand, we're saying a niche brand, a medium-sized brand. What are the steps that you take to then help them solve that?
There are a few different options for enforcing your intellectual property. So firstly, as I mentioned before, you must have registered your intellectual property. Trademark. So if a brand hasn't registered their trademark, for example, then they need to sort that out first. And then once that's sorted, then you can move on the enforcement of that trademark. So what I would do is, it depends on the situation and what the brand wants to do. So if there's a counterfeiter that's making tons of money and the brand wants to sue them, then they can pursue litigation against that counterfeiter and go for damages. And the intellectual property courts in first-tier cities in China are pretty good. So they respect the rule of law. They enforce intellectual property rights for local brands, for foreign brands. They don't care. They're pretty much to the letter of the law. And if there's good evidence against the counterfeiter, then you're going to win. Whether you can get damages or not is a different story. So that's a different sort of question. So you need to do some research into the liquidity of the counterfeiter, which they'd normally be pretty liquid because they're making lots of money from, huge profit margins from counterfeit goods. But you need to look into whether they have their funds available for getting frozen before the litigation is started. Sure. The worst case scenario, that's like the nuclear or the atomic option for a brand. But usually I wouldn't recommend it because it takes around a year. So usually you want to take the links down of the counterfeit, the counterfeit merchants. You want to take their links down off Chinese e-commerce platforms, and also you want to do some investigation into who they are, so you can keep tabs on them in the future. So I would always do test purchase. So I'd always buy products from these people, which is pretty effortless and costless because you can also just return the products, which is a very important thing to do. Because often when they send them out, they will send with a fake address and a fake phone number. And then you say to them, look, I'd like to return this product now. And then they give you their real address and their real phone number or something close to it. Yeah, they might not give the exact detailed address, but they give something close to it. And then you can find out where they are. You can go visit them in person, which I sometimes do. You can put a GPS tracking device in the package to find out exactly where their warehouse is located. Unfortunately, the GPS tracking devices are rather, I've got one actually right next to me, I can get it out if you want, but they're rather large. And so it's a little bit hard to conceal them. So you've got to be, they're going to find out that you're tracking them when they open their package up, which is unfortunate. But you can find out where their warehouse or where their factory is through various methods like this.
Oh, it all sounds very exciting. You're sort of like undercover discovering all these things. But for beauty brands, I with fashion brands, I completely understand the huge amount of money that can be made from the counterfeits, as per your example, the outerwear example. But for beauty brands, if we're talking about medium-sized brands, do you think that there's a sort of a certain size of problem that you then start to really want to solve it? Or do you think that actually any counterfeit should be cleaned up? And it's sort of as we've talked about before, it's sort of an ongoing thing, isn't it? Because of course you shut one down and then they might pop up somewhere else. And so how do you sort of suggest brands manage it?
Well, first of all, I think it's in some ways it's a good problem to have, because it shows that your brand is respected and wanted. So if you don't have any counterfeit activity, it means that your brand is worth nothing in China, essentially. So unless you've obviously shut that counterfeit activity down. So it's a good problem to have. And when it pops up, you need to keep tabs on it regardless. You need to know what's out there, and it will be an ever evolving thing. So if you're a new brand that's coming into China for the first time, for example, and you're doing some market development, you're getting brand exposure, then the more brand exposure you have, the more counterfeit you're going to have. So you need to make sure you keep tabs on it, every 3 months or every 6 months or whatever it is, just to see how things are going. I think, if it's a small problem, then it's easier to control, and then it's easier to sort of keep surveillance of and shut it down as new links or new sort of, we're talking about online here, so as new sort of counterfeit links pop up, it's much easier to then control them. Whereas if it gets really, really out of hand, then it's very, very hard to reel in after that. There's a lot of work required. If you are, so it's almost, how would I explain it? It's like, I guess it's like a sort of, what is it, a hole in the dike or something? Like if there's a big wall holding the water, and you got to patch the wall up if there's a bit of a leak, because if it starts coming through, it's very, very difficult to stop once it gets momentum. So it is harder. So I recommend that brands would shut it down when there's a reasonably significant amount. If there's no sales, then I think it's not as much of an issue. So if no one's really buying this counterfeit stuff, there's less of an incentive. So I think, I wouldn't recommend everyone shuts everything down. But if there is a reasonable amount of sales every month, then it's taken away from your own sales. It's affecting your revenue in the Chinese market. So especially with makeup or in beauty products, because the counterfeiters are not going to be they're not going to be price cutting, because the consumer will sniff that it's fake and not buy it, so they can't price cut. So it genuinely does affect the sales. So I think it's important to shut it down if you're even having say 50,000 RMB of sales a month or so.
Okay. I mean, I also think that it's a big risk for brands with the brands looking to come into the market from domestically rather than just cross-border, because obviously part of that is having a responsible person. And with the new regulations, that responsible person has a huge amount of legal responsibility for the brand. And if you've got counterfeit flowing around, there's a lot of that opens up a lot of potential issues and more danger, I guess, for that responsible person. So I think there's a lot of reasons anyway to shut it down, but from in the new structure and the way that they've put more, the government have put more legal weight on that role of a responsible person, I think that's something that as a brand you need to help your local partners, because you don't want counterfeit product causing complaints, causing question marks, let alone just general brand reputation issues.
Correct, that's right. And that just actually, now you bring up that point of having domestic sales versus cross-border e-commerce. That's another way that we can find out whether something's counterfeit or not if we're buying something online. So when you're talking to people on e-commerce platforms, you can ask them, do you have stock in the country? And if it's a product that's not registered to be generally imported, and it can only be a cross-border e-commerce product, then if they've got a big amount of stock in China that it's fake, because they can't have imported that stuff from overseas. No. So they're producing it locally. So that's another way that that's another red flag for us to find out. Another thing I'll mention is that with beauty products, it's actually a little bit more difficult to know exactly what the extent of the counterfeit problem is, because beauty products, as I mentioned before, the pricing doesn't give it away as much as in other industries or in other sectors, in other categories. However, the other thing is a lot of beauty products sold through WeChat directly. So they're sold through private accounts to direct networks, which means it's more difficult to find. So what you really need, in that sort of case, you need to just find the wholesalers that are supplying these sort of, they call them Weishan. Small e-commerce retailers. So you really need to target the supply to shut that down, because you can't search for that. You can't find who these people are in WeChat. There's no tool to search those people unless WeChat opens up their data to you, which they're not going to do.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you focus on that because they're obviously wholesaler platforms, right? So you can search on those platforms for the wholesalers and try and get it directly.
That's right. The wholesalers, these people, they must find the wholesalers on these platforms. That's the only way for them to find them. So the wholesalers want to be found, and they're on these platforms and they're active. So once you can shut them down, then it's very difficult for these WeChat retailers to find it in the future, and so you can sort of shut it down. And also, it's important to find out where those people are. So if you find a big wholesale ring for this sort of stuff, that's when it's important to buy a product, return it with a GPS tracker, find out the exact address of their warehouse, and take some action on it. So you can do a warehouse raid with the local authorities to shut their product down, or you can contact them and just send them a legal letter to ask them to stop, and then just check on it.
Yeah, no, fascinating, really interesting. Do you have, I guess, any last advice for niche beauty brands coming into China now, considering these sort of issues that we've discussed?
I think stay positive on it. I think a lot of brands will think that the system is rigged, and foreign brands can't even register their intellectual property here, and they can't enforce their intellectual property rights. And that's just not the case. So it's not the case at all. It possibly used to be more so the case previously, 10 years ago. However, now it's very much possible to register your intellectual property, or to take down a trademark squatter, and then to enforce your rights. And so remain positive on it. It's not something that's out of your control. And the other thing is, obviously register your trademarks nice and early, and just keep basic surveillance of Chinese e-commerce platforms. Like it's not so hard. Even if you can't understand Chinese, you can still download these platforms, open them up, and search for your brand name, and just keep a look on these things. Have a look at the price points to sort of gauge what's going on. You can maybe even chat to these people through the platforms themselves, and try to find out some more information. So just keep like a basic finger on the pulse every few months or so, just to see what's going on. Then obviously, if you have an issue, deal with it.
Yeah, totally. Great advice. Well, I'll put all your details below the video, so everyone can get in touch with you if they want to find out more about how you work, and sort of for them to understand how to even start seeing if there's an issue on their particular brand. So thank you very much, Patrick. That was super interesting.
No problem, Ellie. Thank you.